Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spirit Sessions, A View of the Light. We're so happy to see you here. It's very exciting. We have this amazing guest today. I'm so happy to be back. I missed you guys last Sunday. Before we get started, please take a moment to share this out and invite your friends. This is going to be a really, really amazing episode, so you don't want to miss it. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for all of you to be here with us every week. We appreciate you, our soul family, and we love you so much. So let's get into our show. Rhonda, please introduce our amazing guest.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Bex. I don't know, we had a little bit of Mercury retrograde going on there with our things today. But I'm very proud to introduce Dr. Anoop Kumar. He's been on Chopra, so that gives you cred right away. But also, you're a board certified emergency medicine doctor, and you also hold like more degrees in lifestyle health and in management of health. Um, you saw lots of patients, it says in your bio, in the emergency room, and you got kind of discouraged because, as you were speaking to us a few minutes ago, it was down to the same things that brought them there: lifestyle, stress, eating, all the same things, preventable things. And we don't teach enough in Western medicine about preventing, and I don't think, but now I think there's a shift, a conscious shift that we can prevent this. And it's a lot cheaper and a lot more efficient and a lot healthier to prevent disease than to just go along. So, Anoop, can you give us a little bit more of your background and a little introduction, how you came to this like new revolution in healthcare and how you want to spread it throughout the world?
Well, thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Bex, for having me here. How I came to this is I was exposed to Eastern philosophy, specifically the Indian philosophy of Advaita, when I was a child. And that was a big part of my childhood growing up. And that gave me a different perspective about what is important in life. From a rational and a scientific perspective, what it did was say that the way we experience the world and the instrument through which we experience the world, which is our mind or our own inner vision and our perceptual system, our sensory system, that this is as important an aspect of the world as all the stuff out there. The people, the ideas, the buildings, the degrees, the careers, all that stuff is kind of part of the world. But a big part of what forms that is our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own intuitions, our perceptual system. And that was the rational perspective on what was so important to me as a child. So when I went through school and ultimately medical school, I just saw that we were missing at least half the picture because we're always studying the stuff out there, the body anatomy, the biochemistry, the pathology, very rarely looking at what part of us is contributing to how we are perceiving things. And we talk about bias in medical trials, we talk about cognitive bias, but there's so much to that. I think it's easy to talk about bias and cognitive bias, but it's huge. It's a huge part of the field. For example, if I look at something and a cat looks at something, we see different things, right? I mean, a bat tries to see something and I try to see something. We see totally different things. So what we are bringing to any situation is huge. And I think the word bias doesn't quite capture just how important that is. And I think depending on the field, that has various degrees of importance. When it comes to health and healing, I think that's number one. In that field, if we are not aware of the limitations in our vision, then we're going to have incomplete diagnoses, incomplete treatments as we do today. We define the human being incompletely today because we squeeze that human being into a body. And that leads to a lot of the incompleteness in our diagnosis and treatments. It's very effective for certain ways of experiencing, for certain conditions, and it's very ineffective for others. So to answer your question, bringing this perspective of philosophy and introspection to medical science, when I was going into my training and doing my training in emergency medicine, and subsequently over the last 10 years working, I just said, this isn't right. This isn't right because we're not telling patients everything about what is possible, everything about how to heal disease. As you know, people are healing all the time, but we don't write up the case reports. They're not showing up in the journals enough. And so people don't think it's possible. So putting all this together is how Health Revolution got started, and why I'm just overjoyed to bring some of this new programming to the public so that we can actually teach people that you have power, you have the ability to heal. Let's maximize that.
I love that so much. Rhonda, you're muted.
It seems like it's almost like a perceived norm. As you get older, you're going to get sick, and that shouldn't be perceived that way. I think we've ingrained it, like you get old and sick, and really,
Yeah.
I mean, people don't die healthy, but they do eventually just wear out. It's better to wear out than to be shoved into a disease and then die. So is that what you're going to, you have to change a whole mindset that, you know.
Yeah. And, at every age, we define the word old differently, right? When we're in our teens, like 30 is old. When we're in our 30s, 50s is old. When you're in your 50s, 70s is old. Now I kind of feel like maybe 110 or 120 is old. I'm not sure anymore, because I see patients who are over 100 years old in the ER, and some of them look great. Some of them are there because of, maybe they got a cut or something else, nothing life threatening, and they look great. So like the understanding of old is different. And it could be, for people, could be anywhere from 30s to over 100. And people live, like, they're decades apart in terms of how, what we call elders or old people live, whether it's 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s. So 60s or 50s could be middle age, like literally not middle age and older, but literally the midpoint of a lifetime. And imagine how much you learn from age 1 to age 50 if you could learn that much more. So, there's so much possibility. And I absolutely think so. Yes. By the way, we all have been getting sick since we were age 1. We think it's old. No, we get sick and we heal, and we get sick again and we heal, and we get sick again and we heal. That's what the body does. So there's no line where it says, well, at 30 it changes, at 50 it changes. No, that chronological age is rather arbitrary. It's more about the quality of our life, the quality of our systems, the quality of the inputs and outputs that are interfacing with the human system. We're not isolated organisms. Our skin is porous, our minds are porous. We're interfacing beings. We're interconnected, interfacing, exchanging information, exchanging energy, exchanging knowledge, as all of us are now. So there's no rigid line where we say, okay, at this age it changes. No, because our age is always changing depending on the quality of our interactions. So I agree with you 100%. We need to change that mindset from seeing ourselves as fixed things with a fixed lifetime to seeing everything as being modified in the present based on the choices that we're making.
Yeah, beyond accidents, like, the kinds that, trip, fall, cut yourself. I find that a lot of times Western medicine focuses, like, especially specialities, like in like little silos. Like this part is you, but doesn't really regard the whole human being that, or has maybe in the past. Maybe it's changing now, but you might have a heart problem, but at first they didn't even recognize it, that stress could cause a problem. Maybe we did in the olden days when those sayings that it broke my heart came from. But what do you think about that? Is that where the East meets the West in the whole?
Yeah, that's the strength and the weakness of allopathy, right? Is that we kind of isolate parts. Even for the human being, we take the human being, but then we isolate the physical body. And then within that physical body, we isolate heart as cardiology, right? The intestines as gastroenterology, the brain as neurology, and so on. And if it doesn't fall into that domain, if it's not a brain domain, then I, as a neurologist, might say, well, it's not the brain, and refer out, right? If I'm the cardiologist, it's not the heart, it's not the cardiovascular system, refer out. And that has its strengths and its weaknesses. For me, as an emergency physician, is an emergency, it's not an emergency, refer out, right? It goes back to the primary care doctor or some other doctor. So for myself, it's not an organ system, it's more the functional, where we are on the spectrum of disease. And so, yes, that is both the strength and the weakness. In terms of, let's say, Ayurveda, for example, that kind of, it's not specializing in the sense that the sense of anatomy doesn't isolate a human being and a human body. It doesn't isolate mind and body, right? In Ayurveda, they have the Tridosha system, the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And that is actually what constitutes the human being. That's what makes up the human being. And that differentiates into mind and body. So you're not segregating mind over here and body over here, and we'll deal with the body and try to deal with the mind through neurotransmitters from the body. That kind of mixing or isolation isn't there. So that is where East meets West. The West offers more of a reductionist model where we reduce that entire system to a physical thing and then within an organ system often. Whereas generally Eastern practices see the human being holistically, whether it's traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda or other practices. The mind is not seen differently from the body. They're both seen as expressions of something more subtle. And so integrative medicine is trying to speak to that now. Integrative medicine is saying, hey, let's bring all that together. But what we have not done in integrative medicine yet is say, well, it can't be that in China, they see the human body this way, the human being this way. In India, they see it this way. And in the United States, or in what we call the modern world culture, we see it in another way. We're talking about the same species. So we should be able to have one model of anatomy, right? One model. We shouldn't be in a position where we can't reconcile chakras with, let's say, our endocrine glands, or we can't reconcile meridians with chakras, with meditation, with surgery. That shows a paucity of knowledge. That shows a serious gap in our understanding. If we're talking about the same species, we can't write off billions of people who see things another way. They see something that we might not see, and we need to bridge that gap in knowledge. And that's where I think we have to go beyond a physicalist model, which is what allopathy does. It tends to physicalize everything and says mind is secondary, to going to a more experiential model to say that, hey, we experience mind and body the same way. They're both experiences. So experience and something like awareness or consciousness might actually be what is fundamental. And this perspective is entirely consistent with science. It's entirely consistent with rigorous philosophy and with our scientific experiments. We can bring this view to life in a way that really empowers people to discover their ability to heal. So we need to take that next step in integrative medicine to understand the deep philosophy behind this.
And to sort of give control back to the patient. They always, I know in my parents' generation, like God, the doctor and God were in the same sort of category. Well, that's what the doctor said. That's what the doctor said. But if the doctor has like 10 minutes with you, like, what do you do with the rest of your day? So you have to figure that out. And you have a program that helps people figure that out. You've just started a program that's sort of one of the keys to teaching people how to heal themselves along with their physician partner and whatever else they're going along with. So can you explain that for us?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, control, more than control, to me, the operative word is power. This is about power, that our bodies, our systems have been healing for decades. Like I said, since we came out of the womb, we've been facing all kinds of stimuli, adjusting to the environments and viruses and bacteria. We have bacteria all over us. We have bacteria within us. We're always adjusting our environments. And when the system gets overwhelmed, it heals. And every single person has done this thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. So what we have to ask primarily is, what are we doing that is impairing that system, right? Rather than trying to figure out something new and fancy. I'm not against new and fancy, but let's look at the most powerful system we already have that's been functioning amazingly, right, for 99% of people. So that's where it's based on that what I've seen is on our podcast. We have a podcast called the Healing is Possible podcast. What I've seen is people who heal are always doing one of these four things, and we call them the four engines, and that's nutrition, movement, connection, and rest. It is always these. We can talk about thousands of years ago, we can talk about the future, we can talk about any program. It is always these. And this, by the way, is across mind and body. So nutrition is moving to a predominantly plant-based diet and away from processed foods. but nutrition is also the information we're receiving. Right? Am I always listening to stuff about how people are getting sick and things are not possible and the world is in trouble? And is it just bringing down my mood so much, right? What kind of conversations am I having? That's all of this is nutrition, because like I said, we can't divide ourselves into mind over here and body over here. Everything is coming in. We're swimming in a sea of information all the time. So we have to start becoming aware. What is the information we're taking in, whether it's in the form of food, nutrients, conversations, all of that is nutrition. Movement, of course, we know about exercise, but movement is so much more. Movement is range of motion, right? Even if I can't get out and exercise, just doing simple range of motion exercises to get those extra couple inches of range of motion that we just don't use. Breathing, how important is this, right? We know, even if we don't understand prana and chi and those concepts and experiences that are in other cultures, just looking at the breath and how the breath connects the diaphragm, the abdomen, to the chest, to the neck, to the head, and how that directly relates with our mood, right? Anxiety is short, quick breaths, right? A sense of calm is usually full, slower breaths. So breath is movement. And if we want to take it to the next level, it directly connects with prana, chi, etc. So that is a huge part of movement that is not part of mainstream understanding, although it's getting there. Another part of movement is moving our emotions. Could be number one, vying for number one in terms of what helps people heal. And I know both of you know this. I've seen time after time after time on our podcast, people coming in with chronic conditions on so many medications. They've had surgery. They've been told it's going to get worse. They would need another surgery. And they do some kind of hypnosis that takes them back to a memory that gives them an insight, or they quit their job and do something that they love and they start to feel that joy. And that by itself, their disease goes away over and over and over, and they're off of all medications. So moving emotions is absolutely critical. Moving our thoughts, our creativity. What do we love to do, right? If I could do anything, what would I do? For me, it's this. It's this, talking about this. It's Jumpstart. It's talking about the relationship between mind and body. But what is it for everybody listening? And even if you can't do it for a career, can you find 10 minutes each day to do something related to that? Because it will change your life. It will absolutely change your life. Even 10 minutes a day of doing something that you feel you just can't get enough of, that you have to explore, is so critical and is healing. So movement is all of these things. Next is connection. Huge. I mean, huge. And when I say connection, I mean, of course, connecting with ourselves. What do we want, right? Who are we? Who am I really? What am I about, right? Connecting with others, our relationships, having conversations like this with people we love, with people who are nourishing us, connection with others. And then, of course, connection with the planet, which is so often overlooked. That means feet in the soil, right? Not in the shoes, feet in the soil, feet in the ocean, feet in the sand, on the beach. That means fresh air contacting our lungs directly. That means
walking in the forest.
Walking in the forest, as I always do. I get back from a shift in the ER. That's what I do. I get out and we have a forest nearby, and I go there and walk, and I'm often barefoot, and often I get bit, but it's usually worth it. Mm-hmm. And so far it's been worth it. Like, I get bit by little critters here and there, but God, it's so healing. So nutrition, movement, connection, and the final one is rest. Of course, sleep is important, but also knowing how to rest the mind while awake, right? The mind doesn't have to be doing something. Yeah. We don't have to be speaking. We don't have to be thinking. We don't have to be actively releasing our emotions. All of those are important, but we don't have to do them. That's a choice. It's a way of being in the world. And the ability to say no to A, B, C, and D, because I want to say yes to this time. Like, learning that and practicing that is so critical. So these 4 engines, nutrition, movement, connection, and rest, I think 80% of the diseases would disappear if this were focused on. This is primary medicine. The whole idea of complementary medicine is backwards. The idea that pills and surgery are primary medicine is wrong. Pills and surgery are complementary medicine. And we have to rectify this understanding. Pills, surgery, IV antibiotics, all these things are complementary medicine, meaning they're useful when they're needed. Primary medicine is nutrition, movement, connection, and rest, the 4 engines across time for all conditions. This is absolutely critical to know. So we can call Ayurveda alternative, or we can call traditional Chinese medicine alternative, but you'll see that all of these systems from indigenous cultures focus on the 4 engines. They will, because that innate knowledge and that depth of understanding is there. Anything that is not focusing on these 4 engines is complementary medicine by default, because these 4 engines are always working in some way in all of our lives. The only question is, are we aware of it and are we acting on it? So these 4 engines are featured and activated in our new program called the Healing Jumpstart Program. We're just launching it. We're starting to pre-sell the course today, actually. You can go to healthrevolution.org/jumpstart, or you can just go to the website, healthrevolution.org, and you can scroll down. You'll see the Jumpstart program somewhere, and you can click on it. It begins in January. It's a 28-day program. We have 4 different instructors, including myself being one of them, who are teaching the 4 different engines. There are recorded videos. There are 12 live sessions. There are worksheets. Our goal is to support anybody who wants to jumpstart their health. 80% of chronic disease is due to these factors. And in fact, even acute disease, even though we don't talk about it, is influenced directly by these factors. So my goal is to get this to thousands, to millions, to billions of people, because we have to have some foundational understanding of health in the society. It doesn't exist. There's so much argument about what to do. These are the basics. For any one person, there are going to be specifics. There are other programs to learn the specifics, to further tailor it. But the low-hanging fruit, the majority of the power is in learning these 4 engines.
Because it's not taught in school, and it's not taught in school. And maybe it was our parents knew a lot of them, but it wasn't like pushed forward as this is what you need to know. Maybe our grandparents knew it better, and our great grandparents knew, like, yeah, just get out and work and go and do something. And here, this is the food you get. Maybe our food was much less processed at one point in time, and that's what you got. You did.
Yes. And so when you are in that situation, I spent time living in Kerala in South India when I was a child. Everything was organic because we didn't know anything else, right? Everything was organic. Everything was local. The stuff that you would buy that's like $8 today was, I don't know, 8 cents or less at that time, So the thing is, even in those times, people knew this stuff, but it's relatively rare for a family or a region or culture to be doing all 4, right? So for example, in my childhood, they would have been doing a lot of the food stuff, although there were some meats, but we were very low on meats. It was primarily plant-based, and it was fresh food, it was local, etc. But we weren't good with emotions, right?
No.
Don't talk about that. Don't talk about family stuff. Ignore this, ignore that. So that can be a source of dis-ease leading to disease or diagnosis. Some other families are very effusive, very open, but the nutrition part may be not there, or the rest part may not be there, or some other aspect isn't there. So that's why this is so critical, to see the whole puzzle put together. And you're right, it's not taught in school, or if it is, it's a health class for 6 months or a year or 3 years. This has to be taught every year in school, because it's a lifetime practice and a lifetime development.
And sort of showing the way in school, not only having phys ed and classes where they can talk about their emotions, but also having like healthy food in the school, like no junk food in the school. Like, even though kids crave it, you're just giving crack. It's like sugar's crack.
Yeah, it's
really
insane. And that's where it's so much about money, as you know. It's about industry, and it's about making money. And I say, let's make money teaching people the right things and put that money back into teaching and create that cycle. That's my goal. I want to create a system of cycling money where it goes back into elevating people's knowledge, elevating people's mood, elevating people's understanding, and ultimately power. Like I said, the operative word is power. Let's make no mistake about this. We've yielded a lot of our power to others who, don't get me wrong, I think we have a lot of experts who know what they're doing in a particular area. But our culture is such, even beyond healthcare, that the context is totally missing. It becomes so much about how to extract the last cent or the last dollar out of the population, and we lose our power because of subscribing to those models. But I'm saying, let's practice primary medicine. We can all do that at hardly any cost. And then we can also listen to the other experts, but at least we have our wherewithal then. We have our edifice from which to go forth and use those other remedies, those complementary remedies, as they are warranted.
And that brings me to what medicine often looks at energy work and other types of complementary therapy as like woohoo, and they don't give it any slice. And we want to work as partners into the people, because we address a lot of those things when we're talking about getting out the emotions so people can heal, or going forward and feeling more empowered. I mean, a lot of what Reiki does is help get rid of trapped emotions in people's bodies, as well as, can help with inflammation and everything else. But I don't think, we're woo woo and that's all they want to see. But
Yeah.
I think the act of the person going and getting some self care like that really helps move them forward as well.
Well, personally, I think we need to elaborate on this word woo, right? I think when we hear it, I don't think we should just repeat it. We have to call it out and say, okay, you think it's woo. Tell me what woo is, right? If I say something is Menard, I just made up a word, Menard. Well, that's Menard. Oh, well, okay, I don't know what that means. Can you explain that to me? Well, many times you'll find out that the person doesn't actually understand it, right? So it's kind of an escape, a form of escape that I can call it woo. And because I don't understand philosophy well, because I haven't explored my own deep experiences, perhaps some lack of understanding is there, and therefore it's easy for me to call it Menard, because I don't want to seem like I'm irrational, right? I know, because I went through this myself when I was first starting to write about this 10 years ago or so. When I was first starting to speak up, I felt that. I said, well, I have an MD and I have this credibility as a physician, and being rational, being scientific. What are people going to think? What are my colleagues going to think? In fact, I addressed that in my first book, Michelangelo's Medicine. I wrote a letter saying, "Dear physician colleagues," and wrote it out, because that's such an important part of it, is to recognize that the words like woo are often used as blankets, so we can actually avoid having to look at it. So that's number one. Well, what do you mean by woo? Having to explain that. And you'll see many times, I would say 90 to 99% of times, it is because a person doesn't understand that what we are looking at in the modern world culture, forget healthcare, but in the modern world culture in general, is a physicalist model. That we say that mind and body are different, and we say the physical stuff, for example, the brain, is what creates mind. This is not a scientific conclusion. This is a philosophical opinion. It's a fine opinion to have. I'm not criticizing it, but we have misconstrued this to believe that that's a scientific fact and a scientific opinion, and that's just not the case. So the relationship between brain and mind is very much still up in the air. In fact, now it's a super hot area of research in neuroscience. And it depends a lot on what we call consciousness, what we call mind, what are the different ranges of consciousness, and so on, which, again, the modern world culture is not well versed in, whereas there are encyclopedias on this in other cultures. So most of the time, this very simple 3-letter word, woo, is covering up this entire area that needs to be explored and usually has not been explored. And the other big part of this is, I know, as both of you know, as probably many people in the audience know, is that there's no way to actually explore these issues in detail, for example, relationship between mind body, without having to deal with one's own emotions, right? Because there's a certain level of clarity in the mind that arises only when trauma, when suppressed feelings, when difficult experiences have been released, processed and released. It's almost like a veil that sits over the mind. And as long as that veil is there, I fall into my comfort zone where I don't have to look at difficult things, including this crazy idea that mind could be primary and body secondary, which just sounds too far out there. And It's too much a threat to my profession and my career, and I just will not go there. So that emotional part is a huge part of it. There's the intellectual part, there's the understanding part, and there's the emotional part. And I find that the word woo usually veils these two situations that are happening behind the curtains. That's number one. Going back, and then you also mentioned Reiki and how that's seen as woo. Classic example, right? I'm going back to what I said earlier about anatomy. Remember, we said we don't know what to make of meridians. We don't know what to make of chakras. In allopathy, we don't know, because that's just an entirely different model of anatomy. We can't quite write it off. I mean, billions of people, we can't quite write it off. But at the same time, what does that have to do with atoms? What does that have to do with molecules, right? We don't know. What does that have to do with the non-local fields of physics? We don't quite know. And so that's what we should be saying, is we don't know, right? But oftentimes there's that drive that I must remain the expert, and therefore this word woo comes up, right? Again, it's kind of like a veil in most cases. So Reiki, if we understand it, if we can understand anatomy, and if we can see that there is a kind of consciousness that we can say is non-local and non-particularized, meaning that it's not just Bex, it's not just Rhonda's, it's not just Anoop's, but there is a broader, universal, non-local, undifferentiated type of consciousness, which again is entirely consistent with science. It doesn't contradict any of our experimental findings. Then we can say that what we call the non-local fields of physics are mathematical representations, differentiated mathematical representations and experimental representations of this non-local mind. That's a perfectly viable theory. In fact, people have written papers on this.
Yeah, we had someone on our show who was writing about the unified field and proving God exists, or
right.
a source.
There are different kind of understandings and usages of the unified field. But I'm saying that if there is a non-local, undifferentiated consciousness, and if we're talking about an idealist model, which puts consciousness and or a kind of mind first, and matter being its differentiated experience, then it's entirely consistent to say the non-local fields of physics are mathematical and experimental representations of this. And of course, it is those fields that collapse to form the elementary particles, which agglomerate to form the atoms, which is the atomic model of the human body. So there's a perfect, seamless, possible theory there. And once we see that, now we can see that from that level of perception, if the mind is taken to that level of subtlety, we perceive differently. The mind opens up differently. And that's years of introspective practice, as is recommended in so many of the indigenous cultures. And with that level of perception, one begins to recognize, as you know, what we call chakras, what we call another kind of energy that we can't quite measure in joules or in calories. And that is what represents the energy that is recognized in Reiki or in some kinds of Ayurveda or in many different systems. And now all of a sudden, you have an entirely reconcilable model of anatomy if you take an idealist version with consciousness being primary and the non-local fields being this interfacing aspects between what I call the second mind, this non-local consciousness, and the atomic structure of anatomy. Now you can reconcile every single practice, every single healing practice, whether it's modern medicine or allopathy or Ayurveda, or meditation or Reiki, every single one. So all to say, there's a lot behind this word woo, and it often represents what we do not know and or are afraid to step into.
Yeah, because it's totally, it takes a big leap of just understanding, or just a big leap of faith to just go there where you can't see it. You know, just like those sailors that sailed across the ocean to come to North America, big leap of faith that there was something on the other side.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, almost like anything we do, right? I think of a child that we're trying to teach to swim. It's a leap of faith, literally. You leap into the water and you have faith that your parents will be there or somebody will be there or you won't drown. And you never really know until you do it. And it can be very scary for some people, right? Or maybe going away to college or switching schools from elementary school to middle school, or as an adult going to a new job or quitting a job. Like everything, there's a leap of faith. And that's a part of everyday life for everybody who is exploring, who's learning, who's advancing, who's evolving. There's always risk, right? And we never know until we try. And that risk is understandable. And hopefully we can meet the people around us who can help us on our journey.
Yeah. So it sounds like your program will help sort of marry all these things together and marry people together with different, coming from different perspectives and sort of sharing those perspectives and maybe turning on a lot of light bulbs, right, at the same time in their own and
That's
encouraging them.
telling you, that's my wish. That's my dream. I'm so honored to do this because I've learned from my patients, right? From seeing, who do we learn from as physicians when we're training every day? Who are we learning from? We're learning from our patients. They're teaching us. You know, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. We can learn all the theory we want, but it's in working with people that say, oh, I thought this, but it turned out to be like this. Or this person says, you know, I like the way you're doing things, or I don't like the way you're doing things. Like, that's where the learning happens. And so I feel greatly indebted to my patients, and I feel a tremendous amount of love and gratitude to the patients I've seen over the years. And I just have to say this and put this out for the public, because they have to know that we have a tremendous amount of power to heal, and we cannot leave it on the table anymore.
Absolutely.
So cool.
Amazing. I'm so excited about the integrated medicine. Like, all I can think about is that we should have a team of healers, you know, whether it be doctors or energy healers or naturopaths or whatever it is that, you know, counselors, therapists that support us, because when we do, we get stuck in looking at one thing, you know, going to one person. You know, going through a situation with my daughter right now. We went to the ER for stomach pains. She, you know, they couldn't figure out what it was, kicking us back to the pediatrician. And it's like, you know, she's in therapy, but there's no like, it's, oh, well, I looked, I couldn't figure it out, so now it's his job, right? It's not like, let's look at other levels, other facets, other things. Let's look at other, it's just like, well, it's not something physically that we can see, so we can't help you. And it's extremely frustrating. You know, it's so overwhelming, because it's like, you know, you should be able to have multiple options. It's not just one doctor to another doctor who's going to be a specialist, and they won't find anything. And you know, it's going to be something that modern medicine isn't going to be as open to at this point. You know, it's going to be a multi-level healing, a multi-layer, you know, diagnosis, but it's a matter of, so many times they can't find anything and you just have to live with it. And it's because they're not looking at all of the grand, you know, the bigger picture, the grand scheme of things, of all the different parts of it that are in play. It doesn't have to be something you can physically see for it to be real. And I know there's so many people who have those phantom diseases or phantom symptoms. And the doctor's like, well, it must be in your mind. Let's look at that a little bit deeper, right? You know, like, let's look at that and see what it really is, because you can't just say somebody's imagining that they're sick, right? And so, you know, the understanding that this could grow into, and hopefully, you know, it's something that we can see in the near future, where there are so many more opportunities and experiences we can have, where healing is actually a more positive experience in the medical world, and not just, nope, we can't figure it out, move to the next one. You know?
Yeah. Well, you said an incredibly important phrase, which is that it's all just in the mind. Mm-hmm. And I think that deserves a close looking at, because, you know, there's this idea that if it's in the mind, it's not real.
Yeah.
Right? I would say it's the opposite. If it's in the mind, it's the most real, and it's happening, and in some way it'll show up in the body, whether it's recognized or not. Because in my view, mind and body are not different. The body is the flowing mind, and what is happening with the mind, what becomes visible and shared in public, is what we call the body. And they're fundamentally not two different things. So, you know, we have this idea that, oh, it's just in the mind, and we say that's psychosomatic. Right. I think everything is psychosomatic. Mm-hmm. Not just diagnostically, in life, everything is psychosomatic. Like, I love my son is psychosomatic, right? I feel the love, it changes my body and the way I move. It's psychosomatic. So to say that, it just shows how narrow and limited the state of knowledge is right now in healthcare. Yes. That the phrase, it's all in your mind, actually means that it's not important. It's entirely upside down. Mm-hmm. It's all in your mind. Wow, that's super important. It's in your body too then. So let's figure that out, right? That's again, is the dualist philosophy, that mind is over there, doesn't really matter, is secondary, body is primary, right? It's cutting out half the human being.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that's such a critical aspect of that, is recognizing that mind and body are always flowing together. And when we talk about, as you said, when we can't figure out something that's going on, if we look at these four engines, definitely more than half the time, something will come to the surface about what's happening, especially when we're dealing with emotion, or we're dealing with the nutrition or our environment, if we're dealing with the food. More than half the time, no doubt there will be some improvement by looking at these four engines.
Yeah,
I'm definitely going to do that with her. I'm so grateful that you're on today, because it's been so frustrating, and I'm very excited to be able to work with these things with her and see what we can do.
you need to have her listen to this.
Yeah, I will. I'll definitely put it on in the background. She's 14, so I don't know how open she'll be, but I'll definitely,
it'll get into the
some seeds of information, right?
The other aspect of this that I want to mention is, you mentioned naturopathy and other healing systems other than allopathy.
Right.
And I think the bottom line always has to be what works, right? If it works, it works. The truth is, if you go to two different people, even within the same profession, you'll get two different diagnoses sometimes, or two different treatment options sometimes. That's why we have something called a second opinion, right? And when we get a second opinion, it doesn't mean the first one was wrong. It just means it's literally a second opinion, and there can be a third opinion. And the bottom line is what works and what doesn't work. So to me, it's not about allopathy, naturopathy, Ayurveda, etc. What works? If this works for you, and of course we don't know in the beginning, so there is an element of trying, and obviously we want to minimize anything that seems like it's going to worsen our condition or not going to work. But being open-minded and saying, look, my bottom line is what works, and what works for me in my life, my lifestyle, whatever the factors are important to me, what works for me, that's it, period. And that's the way we should be approaching this. I'm not saying Ayurveda is the best. I'm not saying allopathy is the best. I'm not saying naturopathy is the best. I think within each of these, you can find practitioners that will work for you and that won't work for you, right? You can find practitioners that are considered good and considered not good. So again, it's more about what works for this person. And that's where we have to elevate the standard, as opposed to arbitrarily saying it is this system and this has the answers. It has to be contextualized for the person.
And sometimes those other paths support the conventional system.
Absolutely.
And support the body in the other places where you said, like getting better nutrition, and they have the time, or maybe the different words to explain it to the people, and talk about movement, and talk about, someone, they have the time to just listen to the person. Maybe they're more intuitive and can get to the root of the problem faster because they're listening with different ears sometimes.
Yeah. And number one, I think for everyone, I think for a modern society, number one is health and healing. Number one, not just, of course, within healthcare, within all the different healing systems, including allopathy, number one has to be health and healthcare, not my expertise, not to make sure that I look like I'm the best among all the experts, right? I may be the best for this, but I won't be the best for that. And so then I say, that system works better, or that person knows better. And that's often what it's about. It's not even just the system, it's the healing system, but this particular person who practices in this way will work great for you, right? Healing and health are number one. And that has to be, that we're getting into bigger issues of the development of a civilization and a society. But a society that puts health and healing first, everything else will fall into place.
Absolutely.
Right? We put something else first, then things start to break down, because health and healing are what provide insight. There's a common misconception that what we're talking about, that the four engines are just about preventing disease. Oh, that's just prevention. Absolutely not. Even in acute disease, if a person has acute pneumonia, or if a person has acute heart disease who needs surgery, I have people on my podcast, including an orthopedic surgeon, who was told they needed surgery, switched to a whole foods plant-based diet, is symptom-free, when their own buddy, who was a cardiothoracic surgeon, was standing over him saying, you're going to die essentially without this surgery, right? Now, not everybody should jump into that and do that right now, but this is just evidence that this whole idea that it's just prevention is absolute nonsense. Prevention is just one aspect of it. It is for acute treatment also. And guess what? It's not just for medicine. If a person is interested in spirituality, what we call spirituality and spiritual insight, guess what? It's the same things. Think about that. Isn't that amazing? Is there any medicine that does that? Whether you're talking about prevention or acute disease or general well-being or spiritual insight and spiritual advancement, it's the same four engines. My friends, this is powerful. We're just leaving the stuff on the table, and we have to own up to our power and start to learn this.
Yeah, because we push those things too. You have to go outside. You have to move. You have to eat better. You have to, because those are all things that personally up our own personal energy and just like help. I guess I just make you feel better, and when you feel better, you are better, right?
That's a big part of it, because when mind and body are the same, we know the neurotransmitters being released are different, right? We know that every action we do affects also our genes. Epigenetics is showing that, how we can turn genes on and off based on our behavior. So the way we feel is super important, and that's why the word disease comes from dis-ease. It starts as a sense of I'm uneasy about something, right? And that's our human systems intelligence saying, explore this, right? Don't shove it under the rug. Don't sweep it aside. Explore this.
Yeah, I think a lot of society's ills like crime and drug addiction and all can be tied back into this. So and if we're health and feeling better, if we have health and wellness, like you said, and healing, I think a lot of it would just be a better place in the world completely.
And one more huge point that could be an entire conversation, but I'll make it very shortly, that I think this conversation would be remiss without, is that health and healing is not just about living as long as possible, right? There are amazing poets. I remember this child named Maddie, who, this was, I think, a few decades ago, who had some kind of condition. He died maybe in his teens or 20s. He lived longer than expected, but he was an amazing poet, and he brought this tremendous message of healing to the world that people were so inspired by. And, that was his life path. So I'm not saying that couldn't be healed, or I'm not saying anything about his course, but the point is, we're not saying that everybody's going to live to 120, because that's not everybody's path, right? What we're saying is that our current approach is woefully inadequate and misinformed. And if we all gain this knowledge, there will be much greater quality of life, and greater length of life, and greater power, and greater insight. Like, we will start to enjoy life in a way that is unimaginable because of the degree of insight and clarity that arrives in our moment-to-moment life. And that's such a huge aspect of what we call health and healing, is the quality and depth of our moment-to-moment experience right now.
Awesome. So cool.
Good. So good. I love it. We could talk all day about this, and we definitely need to have you back on, because there is so much more we could go into. I love this. And I think what I got most from this is just the realization again that healing is personal. It's not like possible, it's personal. It starts with you. It ends with you. It is you. That is all encompassing. You can have support, you can, have guidance, but it always comes back to you and the choices you make and the thoughts you have. And at the end of the day, like, you live with you, you're you. You gotta work through everything. You gotta face it,
Yeah.
Stand in your power.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, so good. I love it. This is awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. All right, I have the 3 tough questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Question number 1. If you had to choose a song to be the theme song of your life for right now, what would that be?
Starship. What's that song? We can build this thing together. Stand beside forever. Nothing's going to stop us now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I love that song.
I love that since I first heard it when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So that would be like for my whole life.
I love that. That's a great song. Good choice. Okay. Question number 2. What is your favorite crystal that you're working with right now?
I don't know much about the different kinds of crystals. I saw this huge quartz crystal at Virginia Beach a few weeks ago. So I would say, I don't know the names of them. I just know like how they feel. So it's hard for me to give you a word. But we have selenite in the house, which I like. And I have this fiery red one that it's, I don't know if it's a crystal, it's a rock. I think it is a rock crystal, but unfortunately I'm not good with names, so I can't tell you, but
That's
definitely
okay.
selenite is one.
Yeah, selenite's powerful.
Yeah, it's a nice cleanser
Very
and a
powerful.
lifter and just banishes negative energy. It's
Yeah.
awesome. It's awesome.
Yes, we're big fans of selenite, so good choice. Okay, and the third question is, have you ever experienced extra-dimensional intelligence, meaning UFOs, visitations, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think all dimensions bleed into each other. So I don't see this as one dimension and something else as another dimension. It depends on the range of the mind. The mind is tuned according to how the mind is tuned, different what we call dimensions are brought in. So I would say I experience such things frequently or all the time.
Yeah, I imagine you had a near-death experience, didn't you?
Yes, I was told it's called a near-death-like experience, but yes, at that time, a lot of things happened.
Yeah, you see a lot of
That'll be
different
another episode.
dimensions at times. Yeah, that's another episode.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. We are so grateful, and our audience is just loving this. It's so, especially with everything we've been going through the past couple of years, the shit show that it has been, to have someone come on and be able to really validate what we all know to be true about the connection of the spirit and the body and the mind, and how you can't have well-being without really understanding how those all need to be supported equally.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, and we appreciate you for being that voice and standing up for that, and trudging forward in a community that maybe not be so open to it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation to come on. Thank you for having me and for allowing me to speak about this.
Absolutely. Anytime. Like I said, we'll have you back, definitely, because I know there's so many more things we could do with this. And anytime you want to promote something, just message us and we'll be happy to have you back.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, I just have to announce the winner of last week's Share It Out real quick, who won the Egyptian Soul Spa meditation. And that, I see she has just commented. So she's on. Kathy Schleven Donnelly, congratulations. I'll be messaging you and getting that meditation to you. It's an amazing experience. And if you guys want a chance to win, you just have to share it out or even comment. We're taking comments now as well. And we'll pick a winner for next week. So thank you all for hanging out. And we hope you have a blessed week. Next week, we have Juju and Mandy, who are part of the Breakthrough Show Network. They are going to be our guests next week, and we're going to talk about, what's the topic, Rhonda?
Haven't found out yet. We'll find
Okay,
out.
well, it'll be fun to find out. So we'll let you know when we see you next
The
week.
show on Wednesday, so
Yes.
yeah, that's excellent. So another
Perfect.
Thanks.